Hello, everybody, and welcome to Know Your Education Rights with me, Christina Laster, K-12 Policy and Legislation Ambassador, and I am so glad that you are joining. There's a lot of information coming up here talking about education code. We're going to start with the global perspective, and then all the way down to the Minnesota constitutional statute that gives the provision for education. So welcome, and let's go ahead and get started. Hey, if you're watching, you can hit the like and share this information out there, share it with your neighbor. I'm always saying there's someone that is directly within your reach of impact or influence that you could give this information to, and it will resonate with all people different. People are in different stages or understanding about their children's education. And I say share even with community members that might not have a child that's matriculating through K-12 education, but may know of a child in their family, of course, that is in the K-12 education. And that's the amount of reach that you have, right? There are people that live in neighborhoods and they've already raise their children through the K-12, but they can still contribute. They're homeowners. It affects them. The education outcomes affect them. And so definitely reach it within your circle of influence and get this information out there to the people, and especially the ones that really need to hear this information. So again, we're going to be talking about education code. There's going to be some history added in here and how all of these things came to be, so that you can have an in-depth understanding of the education system and your rights. As you can see, the Policy and Legislation Board, in this lesson, you will develop an understanding of how to use the United States statute and code to advocate for your rights. So we're going to be looking at the way that these things are a part of United States code or legislation and policy, and then also how that impacts the state and local legislation and policy with regards to your education code and rights. I want you to set yourself up for maximum success. So during this time, take notes, avoid distractions, fact check, ask questions, put them in the chat, search, inquire, study, apply, research. Why do I start out with search? Well, I started out with search on this one and ended it with research because for the first time, some of you may be getting this information, right? This may be information that be new to you, or things that you haven't heard about before. And so in order to fact check, you're going to have to search for the information after hearing it for the first time, and inquire and study it. And always say apply what you've learned right away, because the thing is that you do not want to walk away from here and say, yeah, I'm going to do it, and then forget. No, the best thing that you can do is get the knowledge, understand it, and apply at the level that you can. And even if you say, hey, I think I got it, and I have a question later on, definitely reach back out. We're willing to help you apply what you learned, and put what you learned into direct action. Don't procrastinate, don't wait. Whatever it is that you can take this information and use towards, go ahead and put it into direct action. All right. Here's the quote of the month. Black History Month, I definitely want to honor the life and legacy of Mary McLeod Bethune. Amazing woman in her own right. And during her time, she advocated fiercely and for education, right? For education. She had some schools, look her up. She ended up, really working with the Roosevelts and what is known as the Black Cabinet to the United States, right? The only Black cabinet that you will see throughout history was one that Mary McLeod Bethune led the way on. And as you can see, she's here with some of her students. If we have the courage and tenacity of our forebears who stood firmly like a rock against the lash of slavery, we shall find a way to do for our day what they did for theirs. And so look her up and see all of the things that she did. Her work still has an impact to this day. There were a lot of departments that formed out of the thought processes around child and family welfare, foster youth, things that she really had a heart and passion for, that formed around what Mary McLeod Bethune did with the Black Cabinet. You can look that up. You're going to put United States Black Cabinet, Mary McLeod Bethune, and you'll be able to find a rich history around what she did. And now I want to talk to you about what code is, right? A lot of times we hear these words and you think they're just a small thing, because in English we use a lot of words and we say them, and a lot of times don't even break it all the way down to what is it that means, right? What is the actual etymology or meaning? Where did that word come from? So I want to talk about decoding the code. What does code actually mean? What are you saying when you say the word code? So code, if you could see right here, 1300s, systemic compilation of laws from Old French code, system of laws, law book, from Latin codex, right? Systemic classification of statutory law. Earlier codex, book, literally tree trunk, hence a book made up of wooden tablets covered with wax for writing, right? Proto-Italic, cod, ek, okay? And then if you see that PIE, that's the Proto-Indo-European. Yes, I believe that's what that means. I'm sorry, I don't have the etymology in front of me, but that's what I am familiar with that meaning. Kehud, cleaved, separate, as the root of kada, tell, to, and you can look more if you want on your own time, searching and inquiring and studying. CODA, coda, meaning, and I found this very interesting. I always find just word etymology interesting. Cipher, a system of signals and the rules which govern their use. The Sense and Secret Code is from 1808. Code name is from 1879, and telegraphy, meaning system of expressing information and instructions in a form usable by a computer. So we have various forms of code, right? Morse code, I'm sure you heard about that, right? But code is a system of signals and rules that govern their use. And so when you think about legislative code, right, rules, laws, a lot of times those things don't seem familiar to you, because it's like, wow, this seems like a lot to navigate through, words that aren't familiar. Yeah, because they're used by the people that use them, right? Legislators, lawyers, judges, different, entities that are familiar with code. But this is why we do this show, so that we can decode what is being said, and what is being applied to you and your child in the education system, and then you can put that into use in the best way possible and know and advocate for your rights, right? So then we have, just code as in to put into code. 1815, from the noun, right? So you see the verb and the noun, you see those ends and that be next to it, specifically to put into computer code from 1947, intransitive sense, write computer code. That little alarm that went off kind of got me distracted. So I need to stay focused myself. I have to remind myself to stay focused. Write computer code is by 1987. So that's relatively new, right? When we talk about coding and with regards to computer science or technology, you see that that is a word that has related to that since 1987, writing computer code, and related coded or coding. Okay, so I hope that gives you a good understanding of the word etymology behind code and the reason why it's important to decode the code, and understand that cipher, right? The system of signals and rules, which govern their use. And we're talking about that when we talk about law, policy, legislation, school codes, ed codes, all kinds of stuff related to education. So let's use a ruler and look at the global standards with regards to education. And for that, I want to take you to the UN. Okay. So what we have at the UN is called the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, which was born on 16 of November 1945. Now, UNESCO has 195 members and 8 associate members and is governed by the General Conference and the Executive Board. Okay. So, like I said, this organization has 193 members, and the previous one was at the time of November 16, 1945. Now this organization has 193 members and 11 associate members, and the membership of UNESCO is governed by articles. So actually there is articles, rules, constitution that govern this, and rules 98 to 101 of the rules of procedure of the General Conference. And the United States actually joined UNESCO at its founding, but later withdrew in 1984 because of a growing disparity between the U.S. and foreign policy and UNESCO goals. So it would be interesting in your studies if this is something that interests, that is, you're curious about, what was happening with the U.S. foreign policy, and what administration was in place, and why was there this disparity or growing disparity during the times of 1984. Now, if you want to study that, that can be a part of what you study, but it's worth mentioning, right? And so after an almost 20-year absence from the organization, the United States rejoined the organization in October of 2003. So that's fairly recent too, talking 20 years ago. All right, let's go to the next. So why do I want to talk about the articles and look at this from the global perspective? Well, there is Article 26, which is the Declaration of Human Rights with regards to education. So as you see here, everyone has the right to education, right? Education shall be free, at least in the elementary and fundamental stages. Elementary education shall be compulsory. So we're going to be talking about what does that compulsory mean, right? Obviously, just looking at the word, it means that you are compelled to do something. And talking about the word etymology behind code, that there is a system of codes that govern that compulsory education, you being compelled, and states also being compelled to provide, right? And so we'll be looking at the responsibilities and roles within that as we go along in this presentation. Technical and professional education shall be made generally available, and higher education shall be equally accessible to all on the basis of merit, right? So talk about merit-based systems. You earn the ability to do that. So when I say matriculating through the K-12 system means, every year students should be progressing through that system, understanding that year's worth of material and then prepared for the next. But we see that is not happening within the U.S. system of education. So we're going to be talking more and more about that. Education, number 2, education shall be directed to the full development of the human personality. This is what I refer to as each child should be able to be in an environment that is conducive for extracting their fullest and highest potential, right? Not one that hinders or stifles them, not one that, harms them in some kind of way. A lot of times what we do see is that children enter education systems one way and come out in a way that they were never created or designed to be. That's harmful. That's harmful in the way that it exploits their potential, and not towards a positive direction, but they should be able to bring a child into their highest and fullest potential and develop them for life, right? And so human personality and to strengthening of respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. It shall promote understanding, tolerance, and friendship among all nations, racial or religious group, and shall further the activities of the United Nations for the maintenance of peace. And I bet you're thinking, well, are we doing that here in the U.S.? Yes, we are. Absolutely. And I'm going to show you that. So that's why I started with this global code article of education. And then we'll go back to talk about how we're doing that in the U.S. and then look at what is happening or lack thereof in your state, so that you can be fully informed on how to advocate. As you're watching this, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. If I do not get around to your questions, know that someone from Minnesota Parent Union will be responding and answering your questions, and I'll do my very best as I'm going through this lesson to be mindful of what's being put in the chat or comment field. Parents, number 3, parents have a prior right to choose the kind of education that shall be given to their children. So in Article 26, number 3, and now remember there's members and associate members who agree upon this in UNESCO with regards to education. They say the importance of parents having the prior right to choose the kind of education that shall be given to their children. And I know that there is some contention between how is it compulsory and then you have a choice, right? That's the fine balance. And that's why parent engagement and involvement in cultural congruence and understanding, and you guys advocating for your rights, legislative advocacy, and all of those things matter. Because if you're not there to say what it is and to say you have a prior right, and to continue to compel the government to work on behalf of the people, we know that it tends not to bend towards the arc of justice. And what is your right? And what is your choice? And then they will turn and say you didn't care and you weren't there to speak up, right? And so we see all of those things happening, and this just reiterates that you, the parents, the families, the caretakers, have a prior right to choose the kind of education that shall be given to your children. Now, this is an agreement amongst nations, like I said. So I just wanted to stop briefly and reiterate and show you that. I think it's very important to understand that when you're advocating, you're not asking for favors. And, this is the way that you have your voices heard in the education system and throughout the legislative process. And we know it's no easy feat. That's why we continue to show up and speak up. All right, and so now we are going to begin a guided instruction, right? Education code and what you need to know, the right to education and UNESCO. I'm going to show you exactly where it is at. Okay. As you can see, we're at the UNESCO site, and the first thing you see is the right to education. Every human being has the right to quality education and lifelong learning opportunities. Okay. And you can just see that they're talking a little bit more about that. Education is a basic human right that works to raise men and women out of poverty level inequalities and ensure sustainable development. But worldwide, 244 million children and youth are still out of school for social, economic, and cultural reasons. Very important. Education is one of the most powerful tools in lifting excluded children and adults. We know that adult illiteracy is an issue here in the United States. And I want you to think that this is something way off, right? Out of this nation, and it's happening somewhere else. No, here in the United States, right? Making sure that our children are numerate and literate is an issue here in the United States, right? So this is with regards to us. We're part of the world, and guess what? These are issues that we face in this nation. Out of poverty and is a stepping stone to other fundamental human rights. It is the most sustainable investment. The right to quality education is already firmly rooted in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which I talked to you about just now when I showed you the 1, 2, and 3, Article 26, right? The third thing being that parents, should be a part and have a prior right to choose with regards to their children, and international legal instruments. So these are very powerful legal tools. Knowing how to utilize this code in these powerful legal tools is something that you definitely want to be put into practice right away so you don't lose your rights, right? You advocate for your rights. And then the majority of which are the result of the work of UNESCO and the United Nations, okay? So here you can go to what you need to know about the right to an education, understanding the right to education, international legal instruments. There you have it. State obligations and responsibilities, right? Enforcing the right to education, legal action. They speak in my love language right there. Developing norms and standards, right? Monitoring the implementation of norms and standards, and supporting countries in reviewing and developing education legal and policy frameworks. So this right here is definitely a site that you want to take some time and search and research and study and inquire. They even have a Say No to Discrimination in Education, Right to an Education campaign, join the campaign, right? And there's some other things, some other tools on here, a very good site, definitely a credible source of information. So here, as you can see, I had already put the Department of Economic and Social Affairs sustainable. That's supposed to be a space in between affairs and sustainable. Developmental Global Goal 4. So when we're talking about looking at what are these goals that we all share in common and the ways that states, nations are working on these goals, we can go to what's going to lead into our national efforts, which are the global goals. We're at the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, Sustainable Development. As you can also see, there are lots of things that you can research here with regards to what this is all about. What are they doing, right? But here are the 17 goals, okay? And the first one you can see is no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, 4, quality education. So that is high up on the priority list of fundamental human rights, okay? You can see that even water is number 6, right? And so 4 is right up there. And as you can see, there are 17 of them right here, sustainable goals. I actually did participate in some campaigns around these goals and really pushing for number 4 to be, considered in a really robust way, and for people to understand that these are a part of global goals and that they are also a part of our national Healthy People 2030, which I'm going to be bringing you to. As you can see, there is a video here, right? I always say, watch the video, further your understanding, go around and read what they have to say. Research some of this stuff, see how they're using the process of implementation. Share this information out, right? There's a lot of people that may not have ever even heard of UNESCO, let alone the Sustainable Development Goals, with education being a fundamental human right, number 4 on their priority list of 17 goals, right? So this is vital information for you to know, and it helps you fully understand the importance of advocating for education. Like, don't relent. You need to continue to do that. And you need to continue to bring awareness around the fact that having an education is and should be considered a fundamental human right, and parents being able to advocate and talk about what it is that they need is also a part of that process. Article 26 of UNESCO, number 3, and I'm going to keep reminding you of that because we're talking about codes. What is governing our system of rules and who understands what and why, right? And this is a part of you understanding and knowing your education rights. So let's stop screen sharing that. And we will go back to our presentation. All right, and so let's start talking about, hopefully I can get this a little bit bigger. Okay, yeah, that's a little bit better. So I want to go on to, sorry, some of this is repeated here. Oh, don't start spinning. Okay, we went over that already. UNESCO. So you get a little repeat. All right. So this is going to bring us right to where we need to be. Okay. Right here, as you can see, there is an Article 6, 26.2. Okay. We're talking about Target 4, which is a part of the Sustainable Development Goals, 17. You see, it's right there on the left at the top, right? And you see the language under Article 26.2, Target 4, okay, free primary and secondary education, all right? So that free primary and secondary education is on the list of the targets under Goal 4. Education shall be directed to the full development of the human personality. We read that a little bit earlier, and the strengthening of respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. It shall promote understanding. So you see the language repeated, and you see the hashtag right to education. Everyone's right to education must be respected right there. Okay, so here we're at Target 2. Right? Target 4.2, and this is still under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 26.2, equal access to quality pre-primary education, okay? Pre-primary education. So we're talking about early childhood education, preschool. Some people have Head Starts, whatever that may look like in your state, but early access and equal access to a quality pre-primary education. Right? We don't want our kids just going to anywhere, right? And not learning anything. We want them to be able to thrive in the environments that they're in. So here you see Target 4.3 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 26, and the global goal of Sustainable Development Goals under UN's like I just showed you, and this is Target 4 of global goals out of 17 goals. 4.3, equal access to affordable, technical, vocational, and higher ed. And it's very important that you see that technical and vocational and higher ed included in this statement, because as we know that some students are not going to want to pursue a higher education in a 4-year university, right? That's just the fact and the reality based on who they are and what they want to do. And so to support that and not look down on that is vital to their development and strengthening the respect for their rights, okay? All right, and so then we have Target 4.4. To increase the number of people with relevant skills for financial success, right? A lot of times, you have people that will talk about they did go to a 4-year university and they find themselves out of a job, Okay. And that wasn't, something that was going to help them have financial success, because now they owe a lot of student loans and debt and all of these other things that we face in adulthood, and, are looking for a source of income. But we're talking about relevant skills that can be utilized in the way that you will be a person that has financial success. Okay, so I'm so glad that that's acknowledged in this target 4 of the global goals. Let's go on. Right, you have 4.5, eliminate all discrimination in education. Now, this is important, especially when we're talking about what has taken place historically with Black people in the U.S. and having that overall fight, whether that was through Brown versus Board of Education, all of these things. Our children now do not have a armed guard to walk them into school every day, right? Yet they may be facing some of the same types of challenges that have transformed and morphed and look different, right? Whether that is policies about hair, their style of dress, or harsh exclusive punishment practices. We know that these have a discriminatory impact. You have some schools that also, have things that happen on campus to students, racist attacks, and we continue to advocate for those things to stop. But I say, never leave your child in an environment that is harmful to their livelihood, to their sanctity of life, to fundamentally who they are going to be, when they get older. And so be mindful about the types of environments. And if you're a new parent or early parent, start looking that stuff up. See the complaints that have been lodged about the school. Note what other people in the community or parents are saying when you're talking to them. And there's some zones and regions for this. And that's why we put on that Office for Civil Rights technical support and training, so that you can understand what your escalation process needs to be. Don't just tell one person and then, leave it at that. Like, if you have to escalate that complaint all the way to the U.S. Department Office for Civil Rights, that is what you need to do, because these types of things are not supposed to be happening. Public education is publicly funded, and your children should be in an environment where they're not mistreated because of their skin color. Now, I know we are still fighting for that to happen in many ways because of the systemic structure of oppression and stratification and discrimination that has been allowed for years prior to us even being born, many of us, right? But you need to understand your rights and what that escalation process looks like. So if you are not familiar with, OCR, then definitely reach out. We'll help you with that complaint if you need to file the complaint. And some of the other things that you can do. Definitely don't just leave it at, I told the teacher, or I told, the principal, and they did nothing. We're not in that era or day and age. We are going to make sure that students are not mistreated or, being harshly and exclusively punished in comparison to their peers just for their skin color. Okay. So I just wanted to reiterate that and give you full understanding of what your rights are with regards to escalation. All right, I had a little charger light come up, and so I was trying to rush to get that in and working so that the computer wouldn't die. I don't know what happened. I charged it prior to, but I think it's just using a lot of power. All right, and so let's go back to the presentation. All right, and so we have target 4.6. universal literacy and numeracy. Children should be able to read and write and calculate, right? Be literate and numerate, right? That should be just a basic function of education. I mean, I don't want to send my kid to school for 6 to 8 hours a day and they come out not being able to read and write. Right? I mean, that's what is happening in the school day if they're not learning how to read and write. And you don't want to let your child get too far behind with regards to literacy because it will affect their math scores, right? It will affect their math computation. Literacy and numeracy are directly connected. And if a child can't read or write, they're not going to be able to do those word problems or whatever they need to understand in the processes. Matter of fact, a lot of algebraic expressions use A, B, and, letters, right? And so, I mean, just think about that in the simplest form. Like going to school, we the taxpayers, we the people want children to come out literate and numerate. All right. And so here you see target 4.7, and that is education for sustainable development and global citizenship. Definitely being able to partake in, the state or the local or, wherever your child is, citizenship, right? Requires them to be educated to a point. Like you can't just assume that people know what's going on. A lot of times, their experiences, inquire, study, research, check for credible information. Don't take my word at face value. You go in and you check further for your own understanding so that you can think and be fully informed and make decisions based off of being fully informed. Okay, so then there's some subsections. 4.A, build and upgrade inclusive and safe school environments. Expand higher education. 4B, scholarships for developing countries. Increase the supply of qualified teachers in developing countries. A national ruler, right? Like how does the UNESCO and the UN and the fundamental right to an education and the 17 goals and number 4 being the education as a priority build into what we're doing here in the US. All right, to the left at the top, the United States Department of Health and Human Services and the Office of Disease Prevention and Health Promotion, right? What are they talking about? Well, you have this Healthy People 2030, building a healthy future for all. And I am going, okay. All right. And so Healthy People 2030 sets data-driven national objectives to improve health and well-being over the next decade. Okay, so here you have the Healthy People 2030 includes 358 core or measurable objectives, as well as developmental and research objectives. And I want to take you to those objectives. As you can see, this kind of looks the same as the circle that we saw on the global goals, on the global goals page where there were 17 things that you saw there. And so I want you to be able to familiarize yourself with this information. Read about the social determinants of health. So we're going to go to those social determinants of health, and you'll be able to see, you can look at the circle and see there's a money sign, right? We know that plus sign stands for healthcare, right? And then there is the little hat, right, for education, people, and I think to the right you see like housing, right? So let's go in and look at that. Social determinants, read about the social determinants of health. Okay, and so as you can see right here, the social determinants of health, it's still okay, are the conditions in the environment where people are born, live, learn, work, play, worship, and age that affect a wide range of health functioning and quality of life outcomes, right? So looking at quality of life outcomes and risks. And as you can see right here, the social determinants of health can be grouped into 5 domains, okay? Economic stability, education access and quality, healthcare access and quality, neighborhood and built environment, social and community context, okay? And all of this stuff it can be downloaded if you go straight to the website health.gov, Healthy People 2030. You should be able to Google that and find it, but I'm going to come back around and leave these things in the chat. Social determinants of health have a major impact on people's health, well-being, and quality of life. Okay, so here are some of the examples that they list, and you see that these are congruent with the 17 global goals and the UN goals that we talked about. And this is the way that nations have, in various ways, really committed to carrying out those goals. And here you see a message. You can go ahead and watch that whenever you have time, and more information, right? And more information. And so if you're wondering, what is the U.S. doing and what are we committed to with regards to being, associate members or members of the UN and UNESCO, fundamental rights to education, you can see that these are part of the objectives. And clearly they have defined those conditions that they're committed to working on, and access and quality, because we can stay there just, for a long time. I wanted to just show you basically what our national commitment looks like, and moving from that global education code law or, fundamental right to the national work that's being done around this and the research. And then we're going to go further into what the U.S. history of education, and then back down to the state. Okay. All right, and so what is the Department of Education, right? What is the U.S. Department of Education? So the department's mission is to serve America's students and to promote student achievement and preparation for global competitiveness. So here we have this word again, global, right? So that you can start to see that this is a global, national, and state and local issue that many people are, working on, and knowing those people and advocating with the people to say, hey, I'm a parent in your area. This is what is a priority and a problem, right? And so as you can see, Congress created the department in 1979, okay? And they had their declaration of purpose, okay? So you can see 1 through 7 was their declaration of purpose. And here's a little bit of history that I think is something that you definitely should understand, which is the department is a relative newcomer among cabinet level agencies. Its origins go back to 1867 when President Andrew Johnson signed legislation creating the first Department of Education, right? Its main purpose was to collect information and statistics about the nation's schools. And so then you have this over the years, the office remained relatively small, operating under different titles and housed in various agencies, including the U.S. Department of Interior and former U.S. Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, now Health and Human Services. So it's great to know that. You see, this history matters. Now, beginning in the 1950s, okay, here's where the transition takes place. In the 1950s, we know what was going on in the 1950s and 60s. You had the civil rights era and the civil rights movement, a tumultuous time of political and social unrest. You have all kinds of stuff going on from, Brown versus Board of Education to, Dr. King's I Have a Dream, and all of those things that are part of the civil rights eras of the 1950s and 60s. Okay. And so resulting from that is the 1960s President Lyndon Johnson's War on Poverty and what was called the Great Society Program. In 1964, you have like I said, the Civil Rights Act, and then after that stemmed a lot of other things, okay? Health and welfare. You see the establishment of Medicare, Medicaid, the Child Nutrition Act in 1966. You have Project Head Start, right? You have Higher Education Act, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which is a house for education under the U.S. Department of Education, and where you can see ESEA right now, it would be Every Student Succeed Act until it is reauthorized. So that we know that there's reauthorizations of these acts, but the act still remains in effect. Okay, the War on Poverty, the Office of Economic Opportunity, Housing and Urban Development. You see the Demonstration Cities and Metropolitan Development Act, right? The Water Quality and Clean Air Act, the Highway Safety Act, the Fair Packaging and Labeling Act. And so LBJ, through his Great Society ideology and agenda, was able to successfully respond to the civil rights, political, and social unrest of the 50s and 60s by a series of acts between 1964 and 1968. How does this apply to states? And so I'm glad you have all this context from the global standards to the national standards. And now we are going to apply this to the state standards. And so as you can see, I have right here in front of you the governing document for the state of Minnesota, right? It is the Constitution, okay? And within that Constitution, you are going to see, here's the articles right here, right? And so you have the preamble, you have Section 1, the stability of a Republican form of government depending mainly upon the intelligence of the people. It is the duty of the legislature to establish a general and uniform system of public schools. The legislature shall make provisions by taxation or otherwise will secure a thorough and efficient system of public schools throughout the state. Okay. Now, why do they need to do that? Right. I mean, obviously, the state constitution has it as a uniform system of public schools. But if you look at compulsory education, so let's define what is compulsory education. Compulsory education laws require that children attend public or state accredited private schools. Okay, I'm trying to close this box. Man. All right, for a certain period of time. So what do they mean by that certain period of time? Well, usually those are age requirements, okay? There are certain exceptions, most notably homeschooling, okay? So you can homeschool all throughout the United States. That's your choice, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be able to receive funding to do that, but that is your choice. Like, you can't be forced against homeschooling. Like, you sometimes in certain states, you got to file a private affidavit or an affidavit with your local education agency or state education agency to say that you intend on homeschooling your child, okay? Just so that they're notified that, look, my child turned 6. I know that there's compulsory attendance laws and rules, but I plan to, here's my stated affidavit that I plan to homeschool them, right? And so it could be that simple, or it could be registering on a website, depending on what state you're in. And I know that you're in Minnesota, so you're going to look up, homeschooling in Minnesota to be able to know what you have to do if that's who you are, right? But virtually all states have mandates for when children must begin school and how old they must be before dropping out. Typically, children must start school by the age of 6 and remain enrolled until at least 16, okay? I know that there are some states that they have from 8 to 16. Right. These laws were put into place not only to improve literacy rates, but also to encourage the widespread child labor practices. I'm sorry. I was like, wait a minute. You see that thing in the way. Also to discourage the widespread child labor practices of the 19th and 20th centuries. All right. And so you look at the origins. Okay. Here are the origins. Became the first state to enact a compulsory education law in 1852, having already passed a similar law in 1647 when it was still a British colony. The 1852 law required every city and town to offer primary school focusing on grammar and basic arithmetic. Parents who refused to send their children to school were fined, and that still happens today. It's called, attendance laws, right? You have truancy and attendance laws that are governed by the local education agency, and if you don't notify them of your intent to homeschool, and then you enroll your child in school, and they're not there for a certain amount of days, then you can be fined and or arrested. So you need to be paying attention to this stuff, right? And so education typically was provided by private schools run by churches. Since they also charged tuition, poor children were excluded or received informal schooling at home. That would change during the immigration boom between the 19th and 20th centuries, as education was seen as the best way to assimilate immigrant children. Okay, so that's when you see the system of common schools become a system of compulsory education, right? And then state constitutions also were established to say what that compulsory education was going to look like, how they were going to offer it, and there you have it, leading back to the Minnesota Constitution that guarantees a system of schools managed by the state, okay? During that time, numerous states enacted compulsory education laws, okay? And we're going to go all the way down, right? So you see that they were designed to take education out of the hands of parochial schools and primarily into the purview of state-run public schools, right? Hence the constitutional guarantee or, protection. These actions were taken in a growing response to fear of immigrant values and the Catholic Church itself. The Supreme Court later overturned these so-called compulsory education laws that required students to attend public schools only. And that was recent too. This is not that old. You see 1917 even right here, right? And we're in 2023. So you guys think about the history behind that, right? Another motivation was the growing public concern over child labor and the belief that compulsory attendance at school would discourage factory owners from exploiting children. In fact, Alabama temporarily repealed its compulsory education law in response to pressure from a large textile company in the state. Mississippi was the last state to pass a law requiring school attendance in 1917. Still, enforcement of these state laws was largely ineffective until states began to realize the value of an educated workforce. So a lot of these codes and policies are tied into the mentality and the experience of the time frame. Current state of compulsory education. While compulsory school is still the norm, several exceptions have been made for specific groups of people opposed to the laws, right? And so you're going to see Wisconsin v. Yoder is about Amish parents and families, and they're exempted from going to school past 8th grade, okay? And so you'll see that. And then if you want to do more, you just go and look up compulsory education. And they also allow you to contact an education lawyer, right? You might need one of those. I don't know. So anyway, I wanted to share that with you because I thought that was a great history to understand what does compulsory education mean? Well, there you have it. Every parent, unless you're Amish, okay, the Wisconsin v. Yoder case decided that, in the United States with a child between the ages of most likely 6 and 16, okay, is compelled to enroll their children in school unless they have a stated, affidavit or, declare that they will homeschool or that child is enrolled in a parochial or private school, okay? And so here we are back at the Minnesota Constitution and the reason behind the uniform system of public schools being stated under this Article 13 of the Minnesota Constitution, right? Here we are again at the Minnesota legislature, and you have the 2022 Minnesota statutes, education code, pre-kindergarten through 12th grade, okay? So that tells you the type of education that's being offered in the state of Minnesota with regards to this education code. And let's look, we have definitions, and here it is, table of chapters 120 through 129C, okay? I wanted to really highlight the fact that, all of these areas deal with something else. You have attendance as number one because of compulsory education laws, right? Attendance as number one, right? So you have that as the beginning of 120. You're going to have that, and you can just always just click on the tab and it's going to bring it up. Like I said, there's a lot within each tab because you're going to see the history of that section right there. I'm going to go back. Okay. You see students' rights, responsibilities, and behavior. So if you wanted to know what is the education code of the state dealing with students' rights, responsibilities, and behavior, you're going to want to go to chapter 121A. Okay. Right here, dealing with school districts, powers and duties, right? Right here about finance, 124, right? You can just go all the way down and you're going to be able to find what the code says and what it deals with. And so basically, this is going to take you to understanding what is happening at the state or local level. Board policies and practices of local education agencies should be aligned with the education code, of course, the constitutional protection of education, and applies, which would be the Elementary and Secondary Education Act and those various titles that protect groups of students. And then in Title I is an embedded protection for parent engagement, parent and family engagement. And so bicentennial speech from Thurgood Marshall, right? And if you guys know the history of Thurgood Marshall, he was also one of the NAACP lawyers at the time that was very involved in Brown versus Board of Education, and then went on to be a Supreme Court justice. And reading through his decisions, is really interesting for me, and that's what I've done on occasions here. All right, and so right here, this speech Thurgood Marshall gave in 1987 was part of a constitutional bicentennial celebration, right? Politicians and judges from around the country were praising the founding fathers for their genius at writing a document that established the guiding legal principles of the Republic for generations. But Marshall was one of the few voices pointing out that the original Constitution required numerous amendments and came to a crisis that required a civil war to solve, and in a time of flag waving and patriotic rhetoric. Marshall's comments surprised many and created front page headlines. And so for a lot of us, that resonates, right? Because we're still saying that the Constitution was defective from the start, right? And it needed several amendments, a civil war, right? Like all of these things that people try to say, oh, it's all good. No. And in this, Marshall also talks about the fact that the Constitution it shouldn't be fixed, right? I cannot accept, right, this invitation, for I do not believe that the meaning of the Constitution was forever fixed at the Philadelphia Convention, nor do I find the wisdom, foresight, and sense of justice exhibited by the framers particularly profound. To the contrary, the government they devised was defective from the start, requiring several amendments, a civil war, and momentous social transformation to attain the system of constitutional government and its respect for the individual freedoms and human rights we hold as fundamental today. Okay, when the contemporary Americans cite the Constitution, they invoke a concept that is vastly different from what the framers barely begin to construct. Okay, so I just wanted you guys to see that and understand that you're fighting the good fight, and you're part of this whole entire history of education and the way that it's going to evolve throughout the United States history. And so keep on doing what you're doing. I hope that this information has been very helpful to you. Please reach out with any questions that you have. Put in the chat if you would like to go over the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and I will take 2 weeks because that's a huge document. And so we can go over some of those titles in more depth. This has been a lot. You might want to go back and watch it again. But thank you all for joining. You have been watching Know Your Education Rights with me, Christina Laster, the K-12 Policy and Legislation Ambassador. And I hope that you stay well and I hope that you thrive. Keep fighting the good fight. See you next week. Bye-bye.